Pluto's presence in a house brings a kind of perpetual motion to the affairs of that house, a dying and rising, a destruction and regeneration. Pluto brings repeated confrontations with the truth. If you meet the truth, it will take you deeper and deeper into the center of your power. If you ignore Pluto's challenges, your power weakens and life becomes painful. Pluto is considered a difficult planet in part because you only get the power you work for. That power comes directly from awareness of yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As with death, there is no negotiation. You either master Pluto, or Pluto finds a million ways to master you. Pluto brings the same maneuvers to everyone, but they're colored by two things: sign and house. The sign shows the way Pluto behaves. The house shows the area of life in which Pluto has the greatest influence. We're focusing on each of Pluto's house placements, and we're continuing now with the third quadrant, houses 7, 8, and 9. The seventh house cusp, or the Descendant, is the first line in the chart that brings us up over the horizon. The bottom of the wheel stands for the development of a person up to adulthood, being born in the first, exploring the physical world in the second, going to primary school in the third, growing up in a family in the fourth, individual self-expression in the fifth, and doing our duties and maintaining ourselves in the sixth. The seventh is where each one of us, ideally as a whole and self-sustaining person, meets the outer world and joins with others in partnership. The most universal partnership all over the world through most of history came in early adulthood, and that is and was marriage. The seventh is associated with the legalities of partnerships, the duties, the benefits, the legal parameters. All partnerships are here: business partnerships, creative partnerships, committed romantic relationships. A partnership means I do this and you do that, and together we achieve a mutual interest, two pans of the scale. This is also the house of open enemies. Why would this be the case? Well, when it comes to those who are most intimate in life, your partner, your husband, your wife, there isn't a lot of skulking around. When they don't like you, they usually tell you. You get to see reactions to what you do and say in real time. Their feelings are obvious. And if you turn into enemies, that's also out in the open, at least between the two of you. An enemy can be a powerful and dynamic kind of partnership, an arch enemy, even more so. Given all this, what should we expect from Pluto in this position? What effect does the planet of sex, death, and power have on these affairs? Let's start with the Descendant. This line is where we learn about ourselves through other people. And Pluto here means the native is attracted to a certain type. In fact, two Plutos on the Descendant that I've known come to mind. One of them was a Pluto on the Descendant in the sign of Cancer. With the planet of death at this angle, by the age of 76, she had been widowed 4 times. All of her late husbands had been very smart men because she viewed intelligence as a form of power. She also had a thing for men who had it together and gave the impression that they had it together, all the way down to the shine shoes. She also demanded that they know how to make love. It was a different time back then, a more traditional time, and even so, she never waited for a commitment to go to bed with a guy. She told me the erotic part of the relationship was too important to be left to chance. She had to make sure that that part was going to be good before she started to focus on the man for real. In the domestic sign of Cancer, she of course wanted a man who would take care of her, bring her security, a home, furnishings, warmth. She had good relationships. The problem was they kept dying. The other Pluto on the Descendant has it in the hyper-vigilant sign of Scorpio. His view is that a relationship is treacherous terrain. Before marrying, he was preoccupied by the idea that a woman was going to try to trap him and get what he had through a manipulative pregnancy. He had an unfortunate tendency to get with women who betrayed him as well. He got married finally, but not until he found a girl who had it all together and showed that she had it all together. She was beautiful to boot. Beauty, like money and intelligence, is power. And his Pluto on the Descendant wanted more than anything to be part of a power couple. It was always important that the woman be faithful as well. For Pluto in the 7th, an affair, a betrayal, a destructive secret ends it all. The main idea was to find a woman who would accumulate things with him. Someone who would gather possessions and power and status and who had an excellent career trajectory. He protects his wife by keeping information about her secret because it never helps when anyone knows anything about them. Pluto is known to seek alliances, and in this house, there's the feeling of you and me against the monstrous world. The Pluto in Scorpio, of which I speak, actually uses no social media at all. He's suspicious of people in general and wants to be sure that no information can be used against him as he follows a lifetime plan to amass power. With Pluto in the 7th, it's easy to see relationships as a landscape of booby traps and pitfalls. For Pluto here, especially in the sign of Scorpio, a certain wariness is natural. Pluto is associated with survival. A high degree of selectivity comes from an underlying idea that when you love, you'll be controlled. Let your guard down, and you can have your head bitten off like a praying mantis on its wedding night. No matter what sign Pluto is in. In the seventh, you can find a lot of anxiety. Love includes a painful hole in the soul that can only be filled by the object of desire. Possessiveness and power struggles are also par for the course. Now, when these natives have lower consciousness, you see crystallized emotions, boiling rage, resentment, and all out war. And this placement can flip over isolation and abandonment as well. Being self sufficient is mandatory for them. Being left all alone is a living death. This placement may say that they'll never have another relationship again. Such is the level of pain when it breaks up. We also may see someone haunted by the last person who did them wrong. This happens from time to time with all of us, but with Pluto in the house of partnership, it's a deep, grueling, recurring theme that needs resolution. And Pluto in the seventh does well to remember that the cure for the last one is the next one. Finally, there are always strengths to Pluto that come from expressing it in an optimal way. The planet associated with the underworld can bring enormous transformation to the personality, making the native unrecognizable in a positive way. Let's not forget the underworld is the place where an innocent goddess becomes queen by facing darkness. At its highest manifestation, Pluto brings serious struggles that end in a deepening and strengthening of the personality, an overcoming of the ego. When it comes to Pluto, change and growth are usually difficult, but you can find someone here who uses the relationship as the place to work through hurts and to confront darkness all life long. The eighth is a complex segment of the wheel dedicated to renewal, regeneration, death, and misfortune. These ideas are connected because you have to know death to have a rebirth, and you must feel unfortunate emotional discomfort in order to come to the conclusion that change is an absolute necessity. The eighth is an emotional house, but more importantly, it's the house of unseen forces. By this, I mean the subtle, uncomfortable, hard to describe forces that propel our evolution. The eighth house is a cauldron in which these forces stew. It's also the house of family by default. It isn't about family per se, but family is where unseen forces run rampant. It's also a family house because it deals with inheritance. That is what comes down to us unearned, both the money and the energies. I think it's always been known as the house of misfortune because it's the house of inheritance. Humans are wired to look for cause and effect. We do something, and we learn that something else happens in return. But in the eighth, we simply receive circumstances. What we inherit is usually a combination of good fortune and challenging fortune. But the fact that we have no control over what we get doesn't sit well with the human ego. In terms of energy, a lot of what comes down through the generations is unclear and extremely powerful. Family is a hotbed of collusion and unconscious phenomenon. Not everyone inherits money and things and status, but we all inherit attitudes and emotions. Some of these match our natural inclinations, and some we would definitely not have adopted for ourselves. For instance, a parent with simple depression is a powerful force. Mood of the mother affects the emotional well-being of the child, as well as expectations about life and the future. That's an inheritance. Being born into wealth and fame on Park Avenue brings options that don't fall to the child of a 13-year-old in Des Moines. That's an inheritance. The energy that flows unseen from those who surround us shapes us on a very deep level. One of the deepest things in human experience is sexuality. And when Pluto is in the eighth, there are usually issues surrounding sex. One of the reasons for this is because not only is this energy considered private, it's also purposely hidden by family and society. Pornography is everywhere now, but it doesn't reveal anything, and it isn't sex education. Sexuality is high stakes in a lot of ways, and as such, it should be spoken of freely and positively. But that is not what I hear from Pluto in the eighth. They report a lot of secrets and misunderstandings and even traumas. These natives tend to inherit a darker view of sexuality, even an obsessive view. You find Pluto in the eighth at the extremes. They may very well make sex their life's work. Here you find sex educators and sex therapists, sex researchers. When Pluto is in this house, sexual confidence is personal confidence. Sexual power is personal power. What they feel about sex, they feel about life. So there's a low tolerance for bullshit. Pluto stands for resentment, and this placement tends to resent anyone controlling them on such an intimate level. And oftentimes, the personal sexual problems that these natives experience actually have to do with discomfort about giving up control. Pluto can bring too sober a tone to an activity that's designed to be joyful and therapeutic. When Pluto is in the eighth, we find someone who's extremely connected to the unconscious flow. So they might also go into the general psychological arts as well. This placement feels things instinctually. They report that emotions are extremely intense, the way they churn, the way they erupt. That energy can feel deadly, especially the darker emotions like rage and envy. Pluto here is bothered by uncontrollable inner turmoil, anything that sucks their power and possesses them or causes them to lose control is a problem. But likewise, there's an ability to reach out on a deep level when it comes to other people. They can deal with crisis and urgency and grief. In other words, they're comfortable with darkness. The drive of this Pluto is to feel flawed as a human being, to feel self-doubt in its most excruciating form, to be bothered intensely by it, and to drive out whatever psychological garbage keeps them from their full power. We've now arrived at another concept linked to the transformations of the 8th, and that is merging. While marriage itself is associated with the 7th house because of its legal aspects, the 8th house is associated with being married or long-term mergings. Merging means each individual dies and they're reborn as a larger and more complex entity. After emerging, it becomes difficult to know who owns what and who was responsible for what problem and who created what success. Everything is now a joint effort, and nothing can happen without the entirety of the couple being affected. Merging in a healthy way can be extremely powerful for Pluto in the 8th. If it's done well and with the right partner, it can bring a lot of strength to the personality. But if you won't change with them and won't even support their growth, any partnership is meaningless. This placement is serious about transformation. They go through considerable internal recalibration throughout their lifetime, and some mergings simply won't survive all that. The other thing to recognize is that we have a deeply unconscious planet here in a deeply unconscious house. These natives don't even know they're doing it, but when life is too calm, they'll make decisions that cause enough destruction to put transformation back at hand. If you're tuned in to the subtle forces around you, it's almost effortless to stir the shit. There's one last thing to discuss, and that is death. Death in the zodiac has never been limited to physical death. That's why the house of death is only midway through the chart rather than at the end. That single fact lets us know that spiritual and emotional deaths are a central factor in life. We can't evolve without them. Not only is the 8th a water house, it's linked to mysticism. You can't divorce the mystical from the physical. In order to be sensitive about spiritual issues, you have to acknowledge that there's also a body that will one day perish. Now, a little anxiety about this can make you feel vibrant and alive. Too much fear of death, however, can make you feel petrified and powerless. It's important for this placement to stay clear of an unhealthy obsession with death. Isn't that true for everyone? Yes, but with this placement, it needs special emphasis because the themes in life keep coming back around to death and renewal and rebirth. For Pluto in the 8th, change is life, stagnation is death. And there's nothing sadder than a Pluto in the 8th who gets stuck in the chrysalis. The 9th house is where the chart really begins to deal with the wider world outside the individual and their closest relationships. The 9th is a vast place that's dedicated to the higher mind. The affairs of the 9th include philosophy, religion, social systems, political structures, foreign cultures, and the gods. These topics are not necessary to live, only to live well, and to check out the upper rungs of the mind. The 9th house brings experiences that keep us connected to a single question. What does my individual life mean in the grand scheme of things? Pluto never lets up, so this question is an obsession throughout the lifetime of Pluto in the ninth. It can even feel like a matter of life and death, the crux of every experience that isn't mundane. Unlike Mars, that's a personal planet and speaks to the ego, Pluto is an outer planet that speaks to the soul. With this placement, we find a soul's desire to find out where the individual stands in the universe. It's difficult to know this answer with finality. It's more a matter of revisiting the question and going deeper with each insight. A lot of people don't seem to care much about this kind of exploration. They might have a fleeting thought on a camping trip while gazing up at the sky. But their relationship to this question is casual. Pluto in the ninth, on the other hand, digs obsessively into these matters. Law, astrology, mythology, all forms of symbolism. And as they develop understanding, they feel powerful. Underneath it all, power is always what Pluto is after. We also tend to see massive transformations in the philosophies that these natives follow. They go full force from one way of thinking to its opposite extreme. These extremes are necessary if Pluto in the ninth is one day going to negotiate something comprehensive. All foreign travel, all higher education, and all connection with spirituality goes back to where the individual fits in a larger framework. Remember that where we find Pluto, we always find resentments. In fact, we find all the boiling, raw emotions, but anger is the most interesting because it tends to be the most destructive. With Pluto in the Centaur's house, we usually see anger surrounding higher education. Maybe they resent not being able to go to college, or maybe being forced to go, or being pressured to focus on a major someone else picked out. Pluto's resentments always come from feelings of powerlessness. The resentment might even come from not wanting to leave university at all. Pluto seems to need something to be pissed off about because anger is an important ingredient in change. Resentments about religion are also numerous for Pluto in the ninth. I hear quite a few reports about growing up in a fundamentalist religion that ruled every facet of life. I hear feelings of betrayal by the church, by God, by the destruction of the goddess, by a malignant narcissist at the pulpit, by fire and brimstone, and by the stringent roles that allow for zero self-discovery. There's a lot to be irritated about in the ninth because it covers all the overarching topics. Yet Pluto in the ninth can't look away from the world. The more I study the effects of this planet, the more mysterious it becomes. It seems that within Pluto's position is a very involved and serious contract, an agreement surrounding this incarnation that amounts to the evolution of the soul. We can't help but care a lot about the affairs of the house where Pluto resides. And the truth is that the ninth is a risky place because it deals with expansive things, and expansion is never uninhibited. There's a Saturnine force in the heavens that works against inflation and increase. This dynamic can become very intense for those with Pluto in the ninth. But there are also some unavoidable strengths with this placement. For instance, they're excellent teachers. All that stewing about the cosmos causes them to be able to tackle huge issues and strip complex ideas down to the bare bones. And this placement believes deeply in the power of the mind. They're drawn to things like manifestation, persuasion, and the power of hypnotic suggestion. They find power in enlightening themselves and in enlightening others, in clearing things up, because there is nothing more powerful than clarity. The ninth is the house associated with faith and belief, and Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth. Merge these two things together, and you get a person who finds death, rebirth, renewal, and regeneration by transforming their belief system. Pluto in the ninth feels compelled to do this. You see, your identity is made of what you believe. Pluto in the ninth dies when a belief dies and rises with a new belief. They can't imagine who they were when they believed that old idea in the past. They wonder how they ever functioned before the latest renewal of their mind. The final destination for this placement is wisdom. Wisdom is the ultimate power. Pluto finds power in anything that increases the chances of survival, and wisdom increases those chances. Wisdom can be taken anywhere and applied to anything. It's portable. In the eighth house of the wheel, all that matters is the ability to perceive larger forces, to sense them. When we get to the ninth, there's a kind of revelation. Those larger forces become known to the mind. Pluto in this segment of the wheel is completely dependent upon the wider world for revelations. And yet, these natives tend to be loners at heart. Their primary relationship isn't with other people. It's with the cosmos itself. Pluto always brings a power struggle to what it touches. In the ninth, the power struggle surrounds exclusion. We see a general sense of restriction and chronic isolation. They're so focused on their place in the universe because they feel out of place in the universe. This might sound abstract, but it can be very anxiety-provoking. Where you find Pluto, you always find a gate to the underworld. There's a myth that has an interesting detail that I think illustrates the painful side of Pluto in the ninth, and I want to end with it. It seems that the first checkpoint for any soul of the dead traveling to meet Pluto is a dock on the river Styx. Here, the boat driver stands with his hand out to collect the toll, and each soul must give up a gold coin. Once the boat driver takes it, he swings his black robe aside and the soul can board. He can now take that soul downriver and through the entrance of the underworld where an appropriate afterlife can begin. But what if a soul of the dead doesn't have a coin? What if he doesn't pay the toll? Well, then he's left to wander the banks in darkness, in isolation, in exile for 100 years, not quite in the world and not quite out of it. People with Pluto in the ninth often feel they're wandering this way, rejected, often by their own culture, not part of the world they're supposed to believe in. We know that Pluto brings abandonment issues. This is the way abandonment shows up most often when Pluto is in the ninth. It's a lifelong wandering of the soul that only eases up through exploration and insight and finally wisdom. Thank you for watching Secrets from an Astrologer's Desk. Stay tuned for all the ways you can get in touch for a birth chart reading and full astrological services. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Joy. Pluto in the last quadrant is next.
Dona eis domine